Sebastian Junger needs no introduction, but we're actually going to have a 30-minute introduction here and then go to your question. So the first question is, in your book, Tribe, at the very beginning you said, after you graduated from college, you hitchhiked across the Northwest, hoping to find, quote, the real me. Tell me about that. And have you found the real you?
Yeah, I think I have. So I'm a product of privilege. I grew up in an affluent sort of bedroom community of Boston. My dad grew up in Europe. He was a refugee from 2 wars. He fled the fascists in Spain in '36 when he was 13, and then the Nazis in Germany. He came to this country and stayed because he felt that fascism would never follow him here, and so far he's been right. No, we're still a democracy. I know it's scary, but we are. And I've been all over the world. This is a democracy, right? We have to protect it, but it is a democracy. So at any rate, I grew up with high liberal ideals, surrounded by books and ideas, and with great privilege, great affluence. And I graduated college, and I just felt like I'd never been tested in a kind of human way. And as a young man, I felt like I'd had not yet proven myself. I know that sounds sort of gendered and archaic and all that. It is, but it's also true. I mean, our species has some sort of eternal truths in it, and one of them is that I don't know how young women feel about things, of course, but I do know how young men feel about things, and they really feel the need to demonstrate their worthiness to their society, that they can be trusted, that they're prepared to sacrifice themselves to protect others. That has been the human norm for millennia. And the downside of a beautiful, wealthy, protected, safe society is that young men never get to do that.
And you specifically, I mean, you have proven it very often taking risks, a level of risk that very few people would take. But I want to go back to, what was it, the early 1970s, and if we had been sitting and meeting each other in the early 1970s, I would have looked over at your leg and said, man, what happened to your leg? That is some bad news. And you would have told me.
Right. So early 1990s.
Early 1990s, of course.
So basically the trip around the country hitchhiking was one long initiation rite where I had to fend for myself, and none of the assets I was born into helped me out there. I graduated college. I was a smart kid. I majored in anthropology. I did, whatever. I was interested in the world. Nothing kills your career potential like being interested in the world and following that for a while, right? So by my late 20s, I was trying to be a freelance writer, but couldn't make a living, and I got a job working as a high climber for tree companies. So I was the guy 50, 60, 80, 100 feet in the air on a line with a chainsaw, taking trees down in pieces. And at one point, the guy who hired me said, if you do this work, you will hit yourself with a chainsaw. You will get cut. And he was right. And I cut my left leg pretty badly with the chainsaw. I rappelled down to the bottom of the tree and spent the next few months limping around. I was okay. But I was living in the town of Gloucester at the time. A huge storm hit, and a local boat was sunk, the Andrea Gale. It's in the fall of 1991. And I thought, I saw the storm hit Gloucester. The boat was from there. I thought, maybe I'll write about dangerous jobs. And that sort of like coalesced my interest. It gave me an identity in the publishing world. And my first book was The Perfect Storm, which I hadn't intended to be a best. I mean, it didn't even never crossed my mind it would be a bestseller. But that sort of sent me off in the direction that has landed me in this seat today.
Well, and from what I read, it wasn't even your intention to write a book about the perfect storm.
Yeah, I mean, originally I was going to write a series of essays about dangerous work. One of the other jobs I was going to concentrate, I had logging, I had all this kind of cool stuff, right? But one of them was war reporters. And my dad had, as I said, fled 2 wars. Wars impacted my family very, very much. There was a civil war in Bosnia at the time. And I thought, why don't I just go to Bosnia and see if I can figure out how to be a freelance war reporter? And off I went, and I fell in with some other freelancers. We wound up in Sarajevo, which was completely besieged. analogous to what's going on in Ukraine, although on a sort of smaller scale, but still just as horrific. And I learned how to be a war reporter. I was with other freelancers. They're mostly young men, and I just found I sort of got this interesting insight into the young male psyche. I think I left after my girlfriend at the time dumped me. Right, I was like, all right, I'm going to Bosnia, and so I got over there, and almost every single young male freelancer I met over there had also just been dumped by their girlfriend, and I was like, what is this? Is this like an archetype or something? So anyway, but it changed my life, and so I continued writing books and continued war reporting until 2011, when my good friend and colleague and brother, Tim Hetherington, was killed in combat in Libya. He bled out from a shrapnel wound outside the city of Misrata. It was an assignment I was supposed to have been on with him. And the last minute I couldn't go. He'd spent a year off and on in the Korangal Valley in Afghanistan. We were very, very close. And he bled out in the back of a rebel pickup truck. And I found out about it in New York with a phone call. And I've felt completely illogically guilty about it ever since.
I mean, and by the way, if you have not read Sebastian's book, War, and especially seen the documentary that he and Tim Hetherington shot and produced together, I mean, it's really one of the masterpieces of war reporting. And it's interesting because about this risk-taking, you've had to assess risk and reward during this whole career of war reporting. And it sounds like you've done a pretty good job of it, except reading in your book, War, when you got to the front line there and you asked this commander, where should I go? Which platoon, which company is farthest into the mountains, into the valleys, and tell us what happened.
Yeah. He said, well, second platoon's the point of the spear. They're the furthest down into the valley, which was a very contested valley. So there's a lot of combat down there, basically every day. Like essentially there was a firefight every day. And so in soldiers' terms or journalist terms, surf's up. Like the story I'm here to cover is happening every day a couple miles down that road. That's where I want to go. And I also knew that they put the best units in the worst places. And so if second platoon was in that place, they're probably the best platoon in the company. So off I went, and this experience sort of transformed me. I mean, we were up on a hilltop. They had no electricity, no running water. They nothing. I mean, they were completely isolated, no communication with the outside world. And they were there for 15 months, and they were in combat almost every single day. And I really became part of the platoon, and it was my first experience in some ways in something that I've been looking for my whole adult life, which was, and again, this is the human norm. This is what we evolved for. It's what makes us such an amazing species. I experienced this incredible thing of being part of a group where I was at least as concerned, if not sometimes more concerned, with the welfare of other people than with my own welfare. And any human group where the individuals in it are concerned more for the group than themselves individually, any human group like that will be actually safer. Everyone in it will be safer. And it's a transcendent feeling. Parents feel it for children. Sometimes they feel it for their spouses. But to feel it in a group, in a dangerous environment, watch young men function or young women, there were no women out there, but in the combat units with women as well, of course, is absolutely transforming. And I remember, I'll end with this, I remember this one guy said to me, we were on an ambush, which means a lot of sitting around. It sounds exciting, but it's actually extremely boring. And I mean, you're basically behind a tree waiting for someone to walk by you, right? And usually they don't. So anyway, a lot of time to kill. And this guy, Brendan, said to me, it's weird. There's guys in the platoon who straight up hate each other, but we would all die for each other. That's what's extraordinary about the human species. And that's what those guys miss when they come home.
And yet you don't have to, you can experience that without the extreme risk you took. And I know having worked at CNN for 17 years, you'd always, I never went into the war zone because I was much more risk averse than you. But I was talking to those reporters who were in the field, sometimes talking to me as calmly as you can imagine, and I was trying to fine tune their writing, and they would say, Michael, we're in the middle of a firefight at the moment. And it was true, totally calm. But at that point, you were as an experienced war reporter, and even so, I remember reading in your book, War, you and Tim were not prepared for the level of violence that you were going to experience.
Yeah, I mean, neither were the soldiers, right? I mean, they all wanted to go to Iraq because they thought that's where the fighting was. This is the 173rd Airborne. So these guys are wired for combat. That's why they joined the military. And they thought it was all happening in Iraq. And then they were told that they were going to eastern Afghanistan, some sleepy little valley called the Korangal Valley. They're like, oh my God, we're going to be sitting around like having tea with village elders all year. And in fact, that's not at all what happened. So they were pretty shocked as well. And we got in there, and it was full on. And
because the Taliban, they knew every step you guys were taking.
Yeah,
you were down in a valley, and they were above, right?
Right. I mean, they were a mobile insurgency, and the strength of a conventional military comes from the fact. I mean, yes, it's visible, and yes, it's sort of obvious, but it has a lot of firepower. There's a real methodology. The power of an insurgency is that it's highly mobile and hard to pin down. They're two very different strategies, right? And you can see that play out in MMA and boxing. I mean, in any adversity, there's the power of strength and size, and there's the power of quickness and mobility. And my most recent book, Freedom, is about the fact that only in humans can a smaller individual or a smaller group defeat a larger one. Every other species size wins. In humans, the smaller adversary can win because they're quicker and more mobile, and they burn through fewer resources, either metabolically or at a sort of like national level. And as a result, there is the capacity in human affairs for freedom, for autonomy, for being self-defining. If the big army, the big guy, the big bully always won, we would not be free. But that's not what human history looks like.
And yet, and we're going to get to your latest book, Freedom, in a bit, but as I think about what you experienced there, you've just got to tell me, all these people were running, you talk about evolution. I mean, people were not made to carry 100, 150 pounds on their back and run. And in that documentary, Restrepo, I heard your heavy breathing. I heard Tim's heavy breathing. We didn't see you on camera because you were carrying the camera. And you could even describe to us how you got those shots while under fire and literally running for your life. And by the way, where did you get that fortitude and even the physical ability to survive? Because you didn't go to basic training.
Right. Well, thank you. I mean, I appreciate all that. I haven't really thought of it in those terms. I mean, people are very imitative, and if you're in a dangerous situation, you learn to be really observe what other people are doing and imitate them as closely as possible. I'm sure that's true if you go to prison. It's true on the first day of school when you're, a freshman in high school, whatever. I mean, that's what we do, is we look around, see what everyone's doing, and do the same thing. And if all the soldiers are taking one knee, you take a knee. And if no one's talking, don't talk. And if everyone's behind a tree, get behind a tree. I mean, it's not that hard. And the comfort of being in a group is enormous. I mean, I've been in great danger by myself, and your mind is blank with terror, right? In a group, even if it's dangerous, there is something about the affinity, the sort of group connection that acts as a sort of buffer for your fear. And I got to say, I would get very anxious before combat if we knew we were going out on a combat patrol that would wind up in a firefight, probably. And afterwards, I would have consequences as well. But during the combat, I didn't really feel much of anything. And the human mind, the human body is great at surviving. And one of the things it does is shut everything down when you're in a critical situation where you can't afford to experience fear, because fear, it can be incapacitating. And so you get this sort of, it's like being in shock and not feeling pain. It's like this is bad, but you're not experiencing it as bad. And then later, it's a great survival strategy. The problem with it, it's like a credit card. You put it, you pay the debt with a credit card, then you sort of paying it off later with an additional 30%, right? Same thing emotionally. I'm not going to feel this right now. I'm going to feel it later, and that means you're going to be feeling it a lot worse. And that's sort of where PTSD comes from, I think.
And speaking about PTSD, well, there's a lot of ways we could go right now, but you talked about terror, and I read somewhere that your agent said, you know what Tim told me? He said, I must be terrified in order to accomplish what is asked of me. And so why is that? And the other thing I would ask is, people haven't really asked of you. It's what you've asked of yourself, it seems. It seems you are totally self-motivated, and you created your assignments. But first tell me, why do you need to be terrified?
I know I don't quite remember that sentence, but I guess what I would say, that there's something powerful that can come out of those extreme feelings. And I think one of the things that really deadens people is living lives that are too safe, too controlled, too predictable, where there isn't any uncertainty, there isn't any fear. Again, I'm a product of privilege, and I see the downside of all of that safety. And so what I needed, at one point in my life, what I needed in order to feel really engaged, like, wow, here I am, it's happening. What am I made of? What am I capable of? What am I capable of doing for other people? Like, I needed to be in a situation that was, potentially fatal. Boy, does that focus you. Boy, does that make you decide what you value and what you don't. I came to fatherhood. I know we're talking about this later, but I came to fatherhood later in life, at age 55. Danger, terror, none of that has any appeal for me at all. The entire focus of my existence is my two daughters. It's been completely replaced. Those powerful feelings of my youth have been completely replaced by the exhilaration and the obligations of fatherhood.
Well, let's jump to fatherhood, because, you have written that you see things now in terms of what you experienced in war zones that you didn't even recognize were happening, and now you do because you're a father. Tell me about that. Give me an example.
Yeah, there's this idea that, like, if you're in combat, or this happened for civilians during the Blitz, like when humans are forced into a situation where they have to rely on each other, it feels very good, right? We're wired for that. We evolved. The things that make us feel good, we're adaptive. And the things that make us feel bad, we're maladaptive. So if people are forced into a situation during a hurricane or the Blitz of London or 9/11 in New York, after 9/11, that closeness feels good. So it was obviously adaptive for our species to feel that way about other people. And I think that was something that really compelled me when I was young. And but it comes with costs. And now as a father, like I'm not experiencing that feeling with a platoon anymore, right? But it's an ancient human feeling, but I'm experiencing it with my family, with my daughters. And there's a real, you sort of escape the tyranny of self-interest in combat. And you can escape it as a parent. And I just don't. It really is a kind of tyranny, sort of being concerned about yourself. What I want to be is the best thing for my daughters. And then what they give back, they're 6 and 3 now, just so that you know. So what they give back is so indescribable, right? And their insights into the world, right? So, my youngest one, I asked her, I was just curious. I was like, her name's Rafaela. I was like, Rafaela, what's? I said, Daddy loves you so much. Do you realize that? And she just gave me this 2-year-old look. She was 2 at the time. And I said, do you know what love means? She gave me another look. I had to ask 3 times. And she looked at me and she said, yes, love means stay here. I was like, okay, got it. How, you can't get that wisdom in a war zone or whatever. Children see the world, they're not pre-formatted. They see the world as it is. And we, because we have to function, we figured out how to see the world in very programmed and channeled ways, which makes us very effective. But we actually have lost that ability to see reality one for one as it is. Children can. And what they give you in that vision, like it's totally transcendent. I'm not religious, I'm an atheist, et cetera, et cetera. That amazing thing that people get out of church, I get out of that kind of exchange with my daughters.
I'm still fixated on that phrase, the tyranny of self-interest, and putting that with another bookend. You've written a lot about brotherhood, which you've sort of hinted at. Yeah. And it feels like the place we're at in our society now, like we want some sacrifice for the group, yeah. And it's hard to find that, and it's hard to find a diverse group of people where everybody is working for that broader interest. And I'm hoping maybe you have some insights into that. Like how can we create, it's a big question, how can we create more of a sense of brotherhood among Americans?
So, we in the United States are trying to do something like many other countries, trying to do something that humans didn't evolve for. Like we did not evolve to live in a group of 400 million, right? It can be done, but we're sort of like, we have to invent how to do it. We are evolved to live in groups of 30, 40, 50 people, maybe 100, 150, basically a platoon-sized element or a company-sized element, right? It's not a coincidence that the sort of like basic maneuver unit of the U.S. of every single military in the world reflects the typical group of a human, typical size of a human group in our prehistory. That's not a coincidence. So how do you do this in a country of 400 million that's very diverse and has conflicts and et cetera, regional differences? You're not going to have a tribal association with 400 million people. Not possible, right? But you can have a shared goal, which is to make this society function in as healthy and just a way as possible, and keep it safe from outside attack, and keep it sufficiently egalitarian that it doesn't fracture and fissure. There are things you can do to promote that. The free press is essential. The exchange of truthful information and the honoring of truthful information is essential. I know that's rather out of fashion right now, but that hasn't made it go away. And the other thing is to participate. It's very hard. Like, it's a big society. It doesn't need any one of us. Like, how do you feel meaningful? This isn't the Blitz in London where you're pulling people out of the rubble. It's a wealthy, safe society. What can we do? And I'll give you 3 very simple things. They're symbolic, but don't knock symbolism, right? Religion relies on symbolism to convey real meaning. It works. First of all, give blood. We can't make blood. We all are made of blood. We need blood. I almost died, we might get to this, I almost died 3 years ago, exactly 3 years ago today, actually, in about 6 hours, 3 years ago. I had an aneurysm, an undiagnosed aneurysm in my pancreatic artery that ruptured out of the blue. Abdominal hemorrhage is a killer, right? My mortality risk was 70%, 70. I barely made it. I needed 10 units of blood. They barely saved me, right?
It just happened in the driveway of your house.
I was talking to my wife and I felt this pain shoot through my abdomen. It was the aneurysm rupturing. It would complete freak. It had nothing to do with my health. It was an anatomical anomaly in my abdomen. It ruptured. It kills almost everybody, right? And I managed to survive. And I survived because 10 people somewhere gave blood. When you do it, you feel like you're part of something, right? You'll never know the person that it goes into, but suddenly you're part of something, and it feels good, right? Getting stuck with a needle never feels good. This does, I promise you. And I give blood as much as I can. I owe the universe 10 units, plus however many more I can give in the rest of my life. Jury duty, you must serve on jury duty. I know it's a pain in the neck. I know you think it's boring, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't matter. The jury is the thing that keeps us from being in a tyrannical society. No one person can decide the guilt or innocence or the fate of another person. It takes a jury of peers. No sheriff, no president, no company like president, no whatever. Only a jury can. You must serve on jury duty. And I tell you what, it's actually an amazing experience, even while being amazingly boring sometimes. And finally, vote. The country needs you to vote. If you don't vote, you won't have a country. End of sentence. You got to do those three things. The country needs you to do them, but if you do them, you will experience this amazing thing of being part of something greater than yourselves. And that is gold. That's the point of life.
So thinking about this whole trajectory you've had here, well, first of all, again, I'm going to ask you before we go to the audience, who is the real you, and what was the pivotal turning point? How would you define the real you?
Well, back when I was 21, hitchhiking across the country, I wanted to know if I was courageous and adventurous and whatever. I was testing myself. And this has to be in quotes, the real you changes throughout your lifetime. And the things that are good and healthy and human at age 20 or 30, a certain amount of risk taking, and a certain amount of adventuring, right? A certain amount of selfishness, self-focus. Those same things at 50 or 60 risk being pathetic, right? And if you are in the sort of more contemplative, quieter life that's typical of someone in their 50s or 60s and on, if you were doing that at 20, man, you're missing out, man. The world is out there just thumping away. What are you doing? You're like, come on, get out there. So the real you must change, should change as you go through your life. So, the real me right now is that, what is the real me? I'm a dad, I'm a husband. I believe I'm an honorable person. I'm pretty sure I'm a good citizen. I think I sometimes have something to contribute to the public conversation through my writing, sometimes my speaking. That's the real me. And it's not the sort of attention-seeking drama of when I was 30, right? Thank God. But thank God I was doing that when I was 30, right? So it really sort of depends on your age.
So listen, the message is wait till your 50s until you have children. Please, don't go earlier than that. I'd like to take some questions from you all. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. Who wants to go at it? Yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to repeat that question so that everyone can hear it. How have you thought about how you're going to bring your daughters up so they're exposed to less threatening experiences? And you'd probably add, but are also adaptable.
What I thought you said was, how are you going to bring your daughters up so that they're exposed to threatening experiences, which is a reasonable. They're both. Of course, you don't put children's life at risk, but you can be in situations that are unsettling. That's enormously good, right? Backpacking in the wilderness, very safe, probably safer than driving to the trailhead, but unsettling, right? I think you want to create situations where you're not in control of everything. I spent a lot of time in Africa, in West Africa during the civil wars, and I had some extremely unpleasant, terrifying experiences there. But my wife and I went back before our youngest daughter was born with our eldest daughter, Aisha, to Liberia, right, which was a war-torn civil, country, and now is just poor. It's totally stable and peaceful. But it's a chaotic, sort of developing world environment, right? And I was sort of curious, a lot of noise on the street and a lot of foreign sights and sounds, and my daughter loved it, absolutely loved it, and she totally stimulated by it. So we want to expose them to the human drama, right? But they are not. I'm a real believer in this. So first of all, we sleep on a pad on the floor together, the way humans have done for maybe 300,000 years until England invented the child's room in the 1800s, I think. I mean, that was, children just sleep with their adults, right? I mean, that's what they've done what our species has done forever. We still do that. And they also, they are not allowed any touchscreen anything, nothing, right? We don't have a TV. I can prove it. I have a flip phone. Here it is. My wife has a smartphone, but she basically, it's like we have a toaster, right? The toaster's on a shelf. When you want some toast, you go put the toast in the toaster, right? She has a smartphone. It's on a shelf. When she needs to do something on the phone, she goes and does it. But otherwise, there it sits, right? And so our girls are not part of this sort of, I think, terrifying, ghastly, and depressing behavior of just being completely sucked into this addictive, compulsive behavior of disappearing into your phone. I think is incredibly unhealthy, and I think it's made for some. I mean, I just read 1 in 5 Americans is depressed, right? 1 in 3 teenage girls is anxious, suffers anxiety. The numbers are terrible, right? The outcomes are bad. This is not good. It's not working, right? And so we're really trying to keep the girls from. So a friend of mine, sometimes parents get a little defensive about when I say they're not allowed smartphones or screens, they get a little defensive, some of my friends. So one of my friends says, so what are you going to do when they're teenagers and they demand to have a smartphone? I was like, we're going to move to the Ross ice shelf in Antarctica. That's what we're doing.
Other questions? Yes. Hold on one moment until that mic comes to you. There you go.
In your book, Tribe, you talked about the lack of co-sleeping in the United States, and you equated that to mental health issues. And I just was wondering if you could expand on your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, they haven't proven an absolute correlation there. But what I would say is that young primates of every species, including our own, are only safe in the proximity when they're close to adults, right? That's true for chimpanzees, every species, and humans, right? And we are wired, infants from day one are wired for survival. And one of the reasons that babies cry when you put them in a room by themselves is because they know they're in danger. I mean, they don't know in a cognitive way, but they are wired to know what's safe and what isn't, and they cry and cry and cry, and so you go in and pick them up because an infant alone in the wild is dead, right? Can they eventually overcome that and get to the point where they realize that all the crying in the world will not bring their parents? Yes, they can extinguish that behavior eventually. But it's an extremely fearful, a dark room by themselves is an extremely fearful, scary environment for a young child. So can you correlate that with anxiety in adulthood? I know, because you can't separate out from all these other things, right? But it's pretty clear I just hear from parents that make their kids sleep in another room. Every chance they get, the children come and crawl into bed, right? You all know that, right? The parents here, right? It's completely universal. The way our some ways puritanical society understands this is that if you let them crawl into bed, you're spoiling them, that they're somehow trying to get away with something. They're trying to get away with being human. We are primates. We're social primates.
Can I just say, thank you for infusing this room full of parents and grandparents with extreme guilt in this church setting.
Well, look, we were trained to do that, right? We were taught to do that. That's how I was brought up. And I knew it didn't produce a good result. I was incredibly fearful as a child because I was afraid my parents weren't going to be there in the morning when I woke up. Our girls are never going to wonder that, right? So, it's none of our fault. I mean, we're all sort of roughly the same generation. It's none of our faults that that's what parenting was. But there is a chance to correct it.
More questions? Yes. Oh, hold on until the mic.
It's wonderful to hear your views on all of these things, and I enjoyed listening to you back when you did the Nantucket project. We've had some other conversations before. I am wondering if you have any fiction books to recommend that pick up on these themes that you're talking about now, and with your anthropological background, the thought that humans are happier and healthier in groups, smaller groups of 100,
Right.
150, and the small town, small island of Nantucket, for example, maybe promotes that.
Right.
Maybe it's why a lot of us are here, and we maybe don't even realize that. I'm also thinking about how on Nantucket, I've observed that families and kids, they're not on their phones as much, and they're outside doing the activities with their family members, and that there's something very anecdotal about that to modern life.
Yeah.
And I am wondering if you do have any recommendations for fiction that picks up on these themes.
Wow. Whenever someone asks me for like books to recommend, my mind goes weirdly blank. But a book that I grew up, that I've read many times, is by Peter Matheson. It's called "At Play in the Fields of the Lord." And it's about the intersection of Western society and Native society in the Brazilian Amazon. It's an absolutely extraordinary book. It doesn't address your question directly, but and I'm not I'm not particularly versed in fiction, so I'm not sure I want to sort of like dare answer that. But certainly, there's an enormous amount of anthropology that supports. I mean, it's not even an idea that needs supporting. Our evolutionary history is what it is, which is that we evolved in groups, small groups. And are we happier? Happiness is a very elusive thing. It's very hard to define. It's very hard to measure. I live in New York City. There are some extremely happy people in New York City, and I'm one of them. But I live in New York City in a very tight neighborhood, in a low-income neighborhood, mixed income, where everyone knows each other. But an easier metric is suicide, depression, mental health issues. Like that's an easier metric. And what it seems to be is there was a sort of global study, and there seemed to be a correlation between the more affluent a society, the higher the rates of depression and suicide. And poorer societies, where they're more cohesive, that has its own stresses, but some of those mental health issues were buffered against. So happiness and meaningfulness are different things. There's a lot of stressed out parents who aren't very happy at the moment, but the meaningfulness of being a parent is, you can't even calculate it. So happiness is a very elusive word that is hard to sort of build a theory around.
I'll tell you something, your college major of cultural anthropology has really shaped your life.
Yes, it has. I see everything sort of anthropologically, sometimes to the enormous annoyance of my wife. And I seem prone to sort of like, I don't know, I mean, God, sort of breakfast lectures. Like if I start thinking about something like, did you know that in baby lemurs, they blah, blah, blah. And my wife is like, it's 7:30. What are you doing? She's still with me, fortunately. But.
Other questions? We've got about 5 more minutes. Yes.
Based on what you've seen on the battlefield, what do you think will be the outcome for the Ukrainians, especially the Ukrainian army?
The outcome for the Ukrainians, fighting Russia, of course. They've invaded, a completely unprovoked invasion, in my opinion. And I mean, from the first days, I just thought the Russian effort is doomed. It's not going to work, right? I mean, they couldn't. It took them It took the Russians 2 wars to conquer Chechnya, which had 1 million or 1.5 million people in it, and no Western backing, right? Ukraine has 44 million people and Western backing. It's not happening. And even if they had overrun Ukraine in the beginning, they'd have to control it. We overran Afghanistan in a weekend practically after 9/11. I mean, I was there. I was with the Northern Alliance when Kabul fell. Kandahar fell a few weeks after that. We tactically speaking, we controlled the country almost immediately, but we were not able to occupy it successfully. It was too big.
And by the way, that company you were with, that you embedded with, it was fascinating because, what we haven't talked about, we've talked about the war experience and small teams can beat bigger teams more. To what end? Like, what is success? Right. And in the case of what you were covering, I remember the U.S. was trying to help the Afghan elders and that community build a road that would have connected them to a broader economy and could have won them over from the Taliban. Never happened. Why not?
I mean, that answer to that is very complicated, but, I mean, the short version is we went into Iraq, right? We did not, I mean, Afghanistan is a big, sprawling, complicated country. If you wanted to win the war there, by winning the war there, that means stabilizing the country enough to bring in a stable, at least roughly democratic system, so that it's not a failed state that can harbor terrorists, right? I mean, that was the sort of the thinking behind the nation building. It's solid thinking, but you can't do that with 15,000 troops, which is what George Bush left there when he moved on to Iraq. It's not happening, right? So why the road never got built in the Korangal, it's sort of an extension of all that stuff. Like, we just didn't have the will, the money, the manpower to do it.
Like we went to war with the military we had, not the one we wanted, which was the famous quote.
Well, we went to war with a third of the military we had because the rest of it was in Iraq.
Right. Before we go to the last question, I just want people to know that. So your latest book, Freedom, which was a much less risky endeavor, but very, very powerful. You are going to be speaking tonight at the opening ceremony. I hope you will all come to the Universalist Church. It's a great opening ceremony. 4 great authors, including you, will be giving brief reflections on what freedom means to them, and I can't wait to hear what you say about that. One last question. I think somebody had a hand up. Did you? Yes.
So Sebastian, if with your experience in Afghanistan, and you were now an advisor to the president, and similar situations happen, how would you advise the president to project American power and conduct itself in face of the same type of dilemmas that we face in Afghanistan?
I mean, every country is different, but what I would say is that the strategic and in some ways moral failure of Afghanistan wasn't that we went there. There were some good reasons to go there after 9/11. It wasn't that we weren't well-intentioned. I think we were. The reason the Afghans allowed the Taliban in 94, 95, 96, and I was there in 96. I watched them come in, right? The reason the Afghans let them in was because the Taliban promised to clean up corruption and run an honest and decent government. Repressive, yes. Horrific, yes. But it was not the corrupt criminal cartel that was there before, and that we stood up under the Karzai administration after we went in. And our willingness to allow to fuel the corruption in Afghanistan with billions, trillions of dollars without any accountability. I mean, listen, the Afghans were thrilled that we were there, right? They were tired of the civil war. They hated the Taliban. We came in, we stomped them. They were psyched, right? What they were not psyched about is that we put in a government that was unbelievably corrupt and self-dealing and self-serving, right? And I mean, Ghani, our guy, left with $40 million in some laundry bags in a helicopter when he fled, right? Like, that's the kind of government we stood up. So what I would say is, if you're going to go into another country and try to bring peace, stability, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you cannot forget the moral duty of giving people a just society and a just government. And if you're not willing to do that, stay out.
I want to end, because it's time to end, but I want to end with a quote I had taken down from you, because, in this spirit of hopefulness, and early you said something that maybe left us hopeful. We're still in a democracy. We can still keep our democracy, and connected to that whole theme of brotherhood. You wrote in one of your books, and it's reflected in your life story, humans don't mind hardship. In fact, they thrive on it. What they mind is not feeling necessary. Modern society has perfected the art of making people not feel necessary. It's time for that to end. And I feel, okay, that's an action item we can all think about. And actually, I'm going to ask everybody, if you all have any ideas about how to make that end, where people do not feel necessary, email me at michael@wavemaker.me, and we will spread the answers back to you at the Nantucket, if you're on the Nantucket Book Festival mailing list, because we really do want actionable intelligence at this book festival, and you've given us a lot of it and a lot to think about. So for your body of work and your life story and everything you're doing, thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure. Thank you.